Welcome back to Grimverse History, where we uncover the strange and forgotten sides of history. Tonight we step inside the private chambers of King Edward IV to uncover the intimate practices that quietly shaped his reign and nearly unraveled his crown. Edward IV did not lose power on the battlefield. He lost it behind closed doors. Each secret encounter weakened the throne a little more. Each broken oath planted a future betrayal. And long before his sons vanished in the tower, the fate of his dynasty had already been decided in his bed. You push open a heavy oak door. Warm air mixed with candle smoke surrounds you. Let the noise of your day soften. If stories like this help you unwind, gently like the video, subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. It's the year 1464. England is still bruised from civil war. Edward IV sits on a fragile throne, victorious yet exposed. Outside, banners flutter in the cold night air. Inside, secrets move faster than armies. England is tearing itself apart in the Wars of the Roses, and onto the throne steps Edward IV, 19 years old, 6'4", and according to every contemporary account, absolutely gorgeous. One chronicler described him as the most beautiful prince Christendom had seen in his day. You can almost see him standing there, broad-shouldered and confident, the weight of a fractured kingdom barely touching his expression. But here's the thing about Edward. He didn't just look good, he knew it, and he was about to use it in ways that would make modern tabloids blush. Within months of becoming king, rumors started spreading through London. The young king had a problem, actually multiple problems, all of them women. His own court historian later wrote that Edward was addicted to sexual desire and would pursue any woman who caught his eye regardless of her station or marital status. This wasn't whispered scandal anymore. It moved openly through candlelit halls and crowded taverns. But this wasn't just royal indiscretion. This was obsession at a pathological level. So how did a medieval king seduce women? Edward had a system, and it was disturbingly calculated. First, there were the promises. Edward would promise marriage, titles, land, whatever it took. One chronicler noted that he would pursue with no discrimination the married and unmarried, the noble and lowly. He'd whisper sweet nothings about making them queen, making their families powerful. And then once he got what he wanted, most of these promises evaporated like morning mist. You stand in the shadows of the court, hearing these whispers pass from mouth to mouth, knowing how little choice most women truly had. But here's where it gets darker. Edward had enablers. Chief among them was William, Lord Hastings, his closest friend and partner in debauchery. These two would prowl through London together, seeking out attractive women. They had a network of intermediaries who would identify potential conquests and arrange secret meetings. One account describes how Edward would disguise himself and visit merchants' wives while their husbands were away. Another tells of how he'd summon women to private chambers in the Tower of London. This wasn't just a king enjoying privileges. This was systematic predation with the full weight of royal power behind it. The French chronicler Philippe de Comines, who actually met Edward, wrote that the king was greatly devoted to sexual desire, vanity, and dissolute living. Now in 1464, something happened that would change everything. Edward fell hard for a woman named Elizabeth Woodville. She was a widow, a commoner by royal standards, and most scandalously she said no. This had never happened to Edward before. Every other woman had either been coerced, promised marriage, and abandoned, or simply couldn't refuse a king. You can almost feel the shock ripple through him, the first crack in a man who had never been denied. But Elizabeth held firm. No marriage, no sex, period. So Edward did something absolutely insane. He actually married her in secret at dawn, with almost no witnesses. On May 31st, 1464, Edward IV, King of England, married Elizabeth Woodville in a private ceremony that wasn't revealed for 4 months. When the news broke, it was a political earthquake. Edward's advisors were furious. His most powerful supporter, the Earl of Warwick, had been negotiating a French princess for Edward's bride. The nobility was outraged that their king had married so far beneath his station. But Edward didn't care. You can almost feel the tension in the council chamber. Voices raised, goblets left untouched. He'd finally met someone he couldn't manipulate, and it drove him wild. But here's the twist that history remembers. This marriage might have been illegal. And before we go any further, take a second and tell us in the comments what's going through your mind. We read them all. If stories like this are your thing, subscribe to History's Dark Ledger. Now, let's keep going. Years earlier, Edward had used his favorite tactic on a woman named Eleanor Butler. She was the daughter of the Earl of Shrewsbury, young, beautiful, and devout. Edward promised to marry her. According to canon law at the time, a promise of marriage followed by consummation actually constituted a legally binding marriage contract. Did Edward sleep with Eleanor Butler under a promise of marriage? The evidence suggests yes. Multiple sources from the period mention this pre-contract. Bishop Robert Stillington later testified to its existence under oath. If true, this meant Edward's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was bigamous, which meant their children, including the future Edward V, were illegitimate. You can almost hear the quill scratching parchment, the law turning desire into a weapon. This wasn't just scandal. This was a constitutional crisis waiting to happen. But let's talk about the other women, because Elizabeth Woodville didn't slow Edward down much. The most famous was Jane Shore, the wife of a wealthy London merchant. Edward pursued her relentlessly, and she eventually became his official mistress. Unlike most of Edward's conquests, Jane apparently held real affection for the king, and he for her. When Edward died, she was genuinely grief-stricken. Then there was Elizabeth Lucy, who bore Edward at least one child. There was the daughter of an earl whose name was protected by sources, but who Edward seduced with promises he never kept. Contemporary accounts mention numerous other women, most unnamed, many married. Thomas More, writing a generation later, described how Edward would say that he had 3 concubines, which in diverse properties diversely excelled. One the merriest, one the williest, the third the holiest harlot in the realm. This wasn't a king with a mistress. This was a king running a rotation. Edward died in 1483 at just 40 years old. Some historians suggest his excessive lifestyle contributed to his early death, but the real curse was what happened next. Remember that pre-contract with Eleanor Butler? Edward's brother Richard de used it to declare Edward's children illegitimate. Edward's 12-year-old son, who briefly became Edward IV, and his brother were declared bastards, removed from the line of succession and imprisoned in the Tower of London. They were never seen alive again. The princes in the Tower, as they became known, were almost certainly murdered. Edward's lustful choice, decades earlier, had provided the legal justification for his own children's destruction. But it gets worse. Elizabeth Woodville's family, elevated by her marriage, was torn apart. Her brother and son from her first marriage were executed. The Woodville faction was destroyed, and the dynasty Edward founded collapsed into the chaos that ended with the Tudor takeover in 1485. So what's the lesson here? Edward IV was handed a kingdom blessed with looks and charm and given every advantage. He could have been one of England's greatest kings, and in some ways he was. He was an excellent military commander and savvy politician, but his inability to control his appetites destroyed lives, deised his kingdom, and ultimately consumed his own children. His secret marriage, born from lust, provided the excuse for his son's murder. His countless affairs left a trail of broken promises and ruined lives. The medieval chronicles called him addicted to sexual desire. Modern historians debate whether his behavior constituted serial predation enabled by absolute power. What's undeniable is that Edward IV proved that being king doesn't make you immune to consequences. Your throne can survive battles, rebellions, and political intrigue. Every promise he broke became a weapon used against his children. Every moment of pleasure he stole became a link in the chain that would strangle his dynasty. The secret marriage to Eleanor Butler, if it even happened, might have remained buried forever. But Edward created so many enemies, betrayed so many people, left so much resentment in his wake, that when he died, those secrets became ammunition. You can almost feel the cold stone of the tower beneath your feet as those consequences finally close in. History remembers the princes in the tower. It remembers Richard de as a potential child murderer. It remembers the Wars of the Roses as a blood-soaked tragedy. But at the center of it all is Edward IV, a king who had everything and lost everything, not because he was conquered, not because he was weak, but because he could not, would not, control himself. You stand in the shadows of history, watching a crown slit not from force, but from failure. His sons likely died in that tower because their father couldn't keep his promises. His dynasty ended because he valued his pleasure above his legacy. His name became synonymous with scandal because he chose desire over duty. Again and again and again. Edward Ive didn't lose his crown on a battlefield. He lost it in bedrooms, in secret chapels, in broken oaths whispered to women he would abandon. And the price was paid not by him, but the children, who never asked to be born into his chaos. That is the horrifying truth of King Edward Ive. The king who destroyed his own bloodline because he couldn't stop himself. The candles burn lower now. The whispers soften. Somewhere, stone walls still breathe cold air. A crown rests on velvet, heavy and unattended. You can almost hear it, the slow drip of wax. Feel the present return to you. The room around you steadies, your breath slows. The night feels softer again. If this quiet journey stayed with you, if the shadows of history helped you rest, you're softly invited to like the video, to share it with someone who listens late, and to subscribe to my channel for more stories told gently. For now, let the silence hold you, let the past sleep, and let yourself drift. Goodbye, and we will meet again.